say to you that for those of you who are here as students, get to know Chapel Hill, get to know the people here. We are a community, and don't think that people that look like you aren't here. We've always been here, and people that look like you built the People's University. So don't let anyone tell you that that's not true either. Once when Orange County stretched from the center of the state to the other side of the state, we were doing things and coming in to do things in this space. So I tell you, I am thankful for your book on speaking to young Black men. My husband is 6'2", and I told him earlier today, babe, you have to make sure that we know what's going on with you, not because you have 2 daughters and a wife that want to track you, but because we have to know that you're okay, because you are public enemy #1. And that's unfortunate, but it's just the truth. Like I said, my husband is 6'2" and a Black man. They want to know what's going on with him just simply because he's breathing and walking down the street. But I say all of that to say, I'm thankful to see these young people here. I'm thankful to see community members here. If you're not registered to vote, I invite you to please register to vote. If you have family and friends that you know have never voted, encourage them to normalize going on a field trip to the polls. I have on a t-shirt that says, voice our truth enthusiastically. That's my acronym for voting, because we need to vote, because our stories are real. Our truth is ours. And whether it's wonderful or not so wonderful, it is ours, and we need to be enthusiastic about it, because if we don't, we will lose it. So again, I thank you, and I will say I am now currently, for the first time ever in my hometown, deciding that I will run for the Chapel Hill City Schools Board of Education, because we don't have a local voice on our board, and we need that, because like the Sankofa bird, if you don't look back and recognize those pearls from your history, you're not going to be able to do well in your future. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Ryan King. Last fall, I was fortunate enough to be able to attend the I2M America Fellowship, and it was a wonderful experience. I was able to meet like-minded individuals, make strong connections with lifelong mentors, get to understand more about my community's history, and I think most importantly, reflect on how I can be a part of making my community better. And I would like to thank Shawn Dove for bringing us together and allowing us to do that. So, thank you.
Go ahead. Hey y'all. Thank you for coming. So because we figured it was going to be kind of an intimate group, we want to have time for Shawn to read some excerpts. We'll have a couple questions from Ryan and I, and then we really want to hear from you all. Questions, thoughts. It doesn't have to be the book, but just so thankful to y'all for being here. UNC students being represented, mentors and Chapel Hill folks, the parents of Chapel Hill students, and another ICA fellow who's here as well. So just thank y'all for coming.
Thank you, Chris. And thank you, Ryan. And thank you, everyone, for showing up tonight. This is my first time in Chapel Hill, and just really thrilled to be here. My name is Shawn Dove, and I am the co-author of I2M America on Loving and Leading Black Men and Boys. Native New Yorker. My mom immigrated to the States from Jamaica and had me when she was 22 years old, right? And raised by a single mom, and she was just so enterprising and building community. And so, you know, I had one of those mothers. She didn't believe in timeout, right? She believed in knockout. Right? And so I don't know if any of you have moms like that, but my mother used to always say to me, growing up, she said, Shawn, I don't have to ask you what you're doing. All I have to do is, like, when I come home from work, see who you're hanging with on the corner, and that'll tell me what you're doing, right? And so I'm gonna let mom know I already took some pictures that I am hanging out with an amazing crowd this evening in Chapel Hill. And as Chris said, let me just thank Chris, who is, for those of you who know Chris, he is a quiet storm. He is persistent. He is humble as a lamb, yet bold as a lion. And we heard Ryan talk about the I2M America Fellowship that we kicked off in Greensboro, North Carolina last October. That was just replicating what we did for adults. And Chris was part of the 2019 class of fellows. So we're gonna have an informal evening. I'm gonna read a little. I was a little nervous, like, I've spoken in front of, a lot of folks and a little bit of folks, and I just didn't want to let Chris down, right? I didn't want Chris calling me and say, I brought you all the way to Chapel Hill, man. They said you can't come back, right? Let me say one thing about, I'm like a miracle. I2 America is a book that is equal parts my story. It's a memoir, and part of my story, someone would have said 34 years ago, Shawn, that if we Google your name, you would be synonymous with black male achievement. 34 years ago, I would have said, what the hell is Google? And I would say, you must be tripping past the joint, right? And that's what my life was like, right? And I also believe that vulnerability is the new sexy. And I am a real advocate for all of us, but particularly black boys and black men, getting in safe spaces where we can be vulnerable, right? And we can share our stories. And so during the whole process of writing the book, the copy editor would look at it and do their work, and they would come back and say, wow, you're very vulnerable, you're courageous. And I had to run, what did I say? What did I say? Do I need to take something out, right? And so for me, this is also about just loving black men and boys. We live in a society where black men and boys are demonized, criminalized, are told that they are the problem. And I just want to be a flag and a banner for saying that there's nothing wrong with black men and boys. It is like this system. It is the structures. And, my North Carolina story, I was sharing that we had a fellowship with the Beloved Community Center in Greensboro, North Carolina. And I remember there, Reverend Nelson Johnson and Joyce Johnson, they are like my godparents in the movement. No matter how old you are, right? You need someone to pull you in and show you the ropes, right? And this work is so much about being intergenerational. I remember at the beginning of the summer of 2016, leading this national movement for black male achievement. Sometimes you're leading stuff and you have a voice in your head that's saying you got this, go ahead, you're doing great. But at the same time, there's another voice who do you think you are, right? You don't have what it takes. I write about imposter syndrome in the book. And I took a week to come down to Greensboro and hang out with my mentors and just be with them and hear their stories, and came back to New Jersey refreshed, right, for the charge. I'm going to change the world. And in that week that I came back in 2016, in the beginning of the summer, Alton Sterling was murdered in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, by the police. And several days after that, Philando Castile was murdered on Facebook Live by the police and had a legal firearm with him. And it was at that moment, right, this is 2016, I still thought that in my lifetime that I was going to have a hand in changing America. I was going to have a hand in ending racism, right? And yeah, I was still clinging, right? That's not too long ago to that vision. And I realized after that week and spending time with the Johnsons, coming back from Beloved Community Center, Shawn, racism is not changing in your lifetime. And for me, that sense of disillusionment was like, do what you can while you are here. And so much of why I'm here is like pouring into young brothers like we have here from NC, pouring into other leaders. And that's what my work is so much about while I am here. And I want to do some reading. All right, what's the time? And hand me my phone because I can be up here for a long time. And because I want to make sure that we have some time for conversation. So I Too America, we borrowed that title from Langston Hughes' iconic poem. And that poem that Langston Hughes wrote in 1926, the height of the Harlem Renaissance, goes like this. I too sing America. I am the darker brother. They send me to eat in the kitchen when company comes. But I laugh and eat well and grow strong. Tomorrow, I'll be at the table when the company comes. Nobody will dare say to me, eat in the kitchen then. Besides, they'll see how beautiful I am and be ashamed. I too am America. And that poem, I wrestled with that poem through the writing of this book. I prayed and I said, Brother Langston, I don't know. I don't think that America is capable of feeling shame for its atrocities and its racism and all that it has done. And I said, I think that we have to not wait for someone else to tell us that we're beautiful. We need to look at each other and say that you're beautiful. Look at the mirror and say that you're beautiful. And I started just thinking about this shame and like doing some research. Who's incapable of feeling shame? And that's like a real narcissistic, pathological personality. And I realize when I think about my commitment to unearthing America's hidden wholeness, this hallowed yet haunted land, what is my role in healing that? Helping to reseed this nation's soil with love, dignity, and justice. And I am realizing what we are seeing here, because there are some places where we cannot have a reading with a book titled I Too Am America on loving and leading Black men and boys. And I gotta give credit to my mother for my love of reading. She had in our apartment from ceiling to floor bookshelves, a bunch of books. And in my early adolescence, I used to flip through the books looking for, to be honest, some steamy sex scenes in the books, right? But she really seeded that love of reading for me. And I remember getting involved in a youth program called the Dome Project. And the director, before, I was a baller, I had a little game, but before we could get on the court, we had to sit in a circle and read out loud to each other. no matter how long it took. The first book that John had us read together was Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. I was like, that's all right, you know, Pip was all right, the stories in there, but the second book was Man-Child in the Promised Land by Claude Brown. Now, in my early adolescence, I was like hanging out, I was drinking malt liquor, smoking joints, and doing all that stuff. I know y'all don't know anything about that. What you talking about? What's a joint? And after practice, me and my friends, we would go and we would hang out. But I found we were talking about Sonny, the character in the book. We were talking about Roz, the exhorter. And ever since then, this love of writing, poetry, and publishing was in my heart. And so much so, I came back eventually to be the executive director of that youth program, the Dome Project, and started a program called Poetry in Motion, Off-Court Creations, with the whole notion that the young men coming in the after-school program, they didn't really want to like sit down and read about history or anything, but they would read Basketball Digest, they would read Sports Illustrated. We had them write basketball diaries and be really creative, doing videos of the basketball game. That's when the big VHS cameras, you know, on their shoulders. And from that, I wrote this poem in 1988 as part of the introduction of the book. Whilst at poetry in motion, I stopped to look for a brother with ways to write a book. Arranged round me with a story to tell, a billion brothers who know all too well about unwritten words that unwillingly die before bred and bound and able to fly. Why do my brothers' words wear weights of woe? My ears to the ground, I'm dying to know. We must give our words wings so they can sing a song for all brothers they will bring. The ability to dream, to fly, and to soar, it's to you, my brothers, these words are for. To give your words a life, you must sit and write your story with tales of what life is like. Do me a favor and set your words free, because I need to hear them. Do it for me. And I write in the beginning of the book, poetry, writing, and publishing have long been my salvation, my healing balm, my go-to when nothing else seems to ease whatever is ailing my heart and soul. As a 16-year-old boy on a prep school campus in the boonies of Massachusetts and far from my New York City neighborhoods, I discovered my penchant for writing and reciting poetry. A strange man in a strange land, poetry scented my inner compass and allowed me to cope with my life. Poetry provided an escape hatch to free me from the tightening grips of an adolescent flailing, depression I didn't know I had, and a deepening addiction to drugs and alcohol. Poetry nudged with a fuzzy liminal feeling that I had a purpose for my life, one I worried I would never find. Poetry allowed me to put those fragile feelings and unexplored emotions first on paper and then spoken out loud into my world. That self-expression, my spoken word, saved me from myself. I didn't know it at the time, but poetry saved my life. With profound respect for poets and life-saving reverence for the often grueling process of producing poetry, we borrow the title of this book from the venerable Harlem Renaissance poet Langston Hughes. The moment my co-author Nick Child suggested the title, I Too Am America, on loving and leading Black men and boys, I knew it perfectly captured the story I wanted to share in this book. This is a story of a Black baby boy born in 1962 in New York City during the Civil Rights Movement, who comes of age and grips with the paradox of promise and peril for most Black boys and men in America. When Langston Hughes penned his prophetic poem in 1926, he portrayed what it meant to be Black in America. I, too, profoundly depicts the paradox of promise and peril in just 62 words. Sadly, almost a century later, the tomorrow he foretells has yet to come today. Hughes wrote his poem during the Harlem Renaissance, a seminal movement to claim our culture and proclaim our worth in this country. We wrote this book in 2019-2020 during the equally powerful emergent movement for Black lives. In the wake of the murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery, among too many others. And amid a global pandemic, this country wrestled with what many have been calling a racial reckoning in America. Such a declaration is premature for this era of American history, as still I too sing America. And so the book is equal parts memoir, my story. We also follow and tell the stories of two young men, Jamari from Detroit and Romero from Oakland. And their stories depict that when a community surrounds our young people with love, with care, that the adversity that we face can be overcome. And it tells the story of Jamari's relationship with Quan Nellum, a teacher, and how Jamari, we all have what I call a G-spot. Not that G-spot. It is called a G-spot because it's your gift spot. It's for some your God spot. It's your great spot, right? I know OGs know about Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and his sky hook. That was his G-spot, right? And Jamari's G-spot was hip hop and poetry and rap. And his mentor, Quan Nellums, tapped into his G-spot, and they created something called the Lyricist Society for young men attending Frederick Douglass. Examples that everything we need for our young men, we already have. It's inside of us, the creativity. And Romero, he was involved with a program called Kingmakers of Oakland. And so I tell the stories, and while we're a generation apart, Romero's story is my story. There is power when someone says to you, you have potential. And when my mentor in my early adolescence, John Simon, says, Shawn, you have potential. You can do some great things if you spend less time on the corner of 80th Street selling loose joints. I didn't think he knew what I was doing when I left the Dome. And my mother told me that all the time. But sometimes it's the right word from the right person at the right time, right? And so Jamari's story and Romero's story is my story. It's your story. It's your story. And I write a lot about vulnerability, mental health, my recovery, right? I write about that it's a miracle that I am here because I share how I came back to lead this youth program and come back to be the executive director. But what I brought with me was my addiction to drugs and alcohol. And I had it all planned out. 34th Street and Penn Station, I was going to jump on the tracks and grab the third rail. That was the plan. And I remember going AWOL for a week and visiting my best friend, my late best friend, Anthony Gibbons, and I was at his house in Trenton, New Jersey. And my plan was I was going to use up all of my drugs, and when I was finished, I was going to come back and commit suicide. And he had a newborn daughter, Adrian, and I was watching in the depths of my despair his relationship with Adrian. And God just said, it's not your time. And so instead of jumping on the tracks, I got on the C train and went uptown to recovery. I write about how I was an executive director, right? And I was involved in a whole lot of leadership. But God, in one leadership program, he saw fit that the person I was closest to was the leader of a drug rehab, right? And I just felt I could only get clean there. And that's almost 34 years ago, right? And I think back, if I would have jumped as so many of our young brothers and our black youth are doing today, I would not be the father of Nehemiah, Cameron, and Kate. I would not be married to my divine mate, Desiree. Second marriage, I write about that in the book too. So much I would not have been able to lead the campaign for Black Male Achievement. And I look back, and anytime I talk to young people and they are despondent, we see it in social media and the news, we're dying. We're taking our lives. But what you're doing, you're making a decision that's killing your future. And I said, look at all the things that I was able to do since then. And today was a day as I headed to the train station, to the airport, where I had a conversation with a young man that's leading an organization in the movement that had just made a decision to go into rehab. And he was able to call me because he knew my story. And I was able to tell him, read chapter 4, braving my wilderness. And this is not just for young men, it's for older men as well. And I write in the book, I had a godmother in Harlem that took care of me during the week called Alel. She ran numbers with Nicky Barnes' father, Roy Barnes. That's a whole Harlem thing. These names may not ring a bell to you. And growing up, I was a bedwetter. And I write about hanging out, playing with my friends on Lenox Avenue on 119th Street. And my godmother, Lel, it was some old school discipline, and she thought that she could embarrass me into stop wetting the bed. And I remember her putting my stained sheets on the fire escape. And we stopped, everybody, the kids were laughing, Sean, Peter, and I didn't know that was trauma, but it was trauma. And I had a brother that's a year older than me read the book, and he called me and he said, thank you. That was my story, right? And I just literally felt this 61-year-old brother like releasing shame in that moment that he was holding on to. And that's why it's important that we embrace each other, we tell our stories, right? So I'm gonna read another portion of the book. One of my joys was just having an opportunity to play a part in helping President Obama launch My Brother's Keeper. There were a lot of folks involved. It was not like, me and the press, like in a room together, like, yo, this is what we want to do. You need to do this, you need to do that. It was a process, right? And I remember, and I have this photo where we met with the president in the Roosevelt Room. And, when you're living your purpose, titles don't mean a thing, right? And I was a junior staff member with a bunch of presidents of foundations and CEOs of corporations, and we were having this meeting, and I come into the room, and my name tag is right across from the president. And that was all about just walking in purpose. And so let me share a little bit about how that came about. And this is chapter 9. The president is looking for you. I am asking you to believe not in my ability to bring about change, but in yours. And that's a quote from President Barack Obama. In 2013, after a Florida jury acquitted George Zimmerman for the killing of Trayvon Martin, the Black community was rocked by shock and broiling anger. On a brutally hot July day in the New York metropolitan area, with the afternoon temperature inching towards 100 degrees, I was having my own moments of frustration, trying to figure out how an organization dedicated to the upliftment of Black boys could respond in a meaningful, proactive way. I was driving along Route 22 in central New Jersey on my way home when I got a curious text from Ebony Editor-in-Chief Kieran Mayo. The president is looking for you. 6 words that to me were incomprehensible. Which president? The president of what? Since I was driving, I didn't bother to ask her what she was talking about. But when I reached the house and turned on CNN, I quickly figured it out. President Obama had given a speech from the White House at 1:33 p.m. responding to the Zimmerman verdict. I sat down and watched the excerpts that kept playing on the news. It was one of those momentous occasions when the nation's first Black president dared to speak frankly to his country about race, Black men, and boys and their perilous history in this nation. In my Obama voice, when Trayvon Martin was first shot, I said that this could have been my son. Another way of saying that is Trayvon Martin could have been me 35 years ago. And when you think about why, in the African American community at least, there's a lot of pain around what happened here. I think it's important to recognize that the African American community is looking at this issue through a set of experiences and a history that doesn't go away. There are very few African American men in this country who haven't had the experience of being followed when they were shopping in a department store. That includes me. There are very few African American men who haven't had the experience of walking across the street and hearing the locks on the doors of cars. That happened to me, at least before I was a senator. There are very few African Americans who haven't had the experience of getting on an elevator and a woman clutching her purse nervously and holding her breath until she had a chance to get off. That happens often. Then the president went on to lay out preliminary plans that felt like he was speaking to me directly. Just like I felt hearing Susan L. Taylor's comments in a packed Harlem elementary school auditorium some 16 years earlier, right? And I write about how we got to have that meeting with the president, right? And I think that before we get into conversation, My mantra has always been, there's no cavalry coming to save the day in our communities, right? We are the iconic leaders that we've been waiting for. We are the curators of the change we're seeking to see. And when you think of curation, that says we have everything that we need. And Chris is familiar with the Black Male Achievement. Donna, familiar with the work over the last 15 years. And, you know, sadly to say, sometimes it was ego. It was territory. We were so excited for having a table to talk about Black men and boys that we got to the table and we did a bad job strategizing and collaborating. And so that work still needs to be done. And so at the end of the day, I to America is all about love. In the afterword, I say that, I quote Maya Angelou, there is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you. We need to hear your stories. Your story is unique. Somebody is waiting to hear your story. Somebody's liberation and freedom is based in you telling your story and having the courage to tell your story. And so I'm going to close this portion with how I began with a poem. And this is part of, I write about in my early days of going to a prep school away from my homeboys. And this was 1978, and I decided to take a poetry class. In 1978, I know we're celebrating 50 years of hip hop, but in 1978, Sugar Hill Gang, Rappers Delight just came out. Poetry was not all that cool in my crowd, and I was saying, I'm away from home. Let me try something different. Let me try poetry. And I remember getting these assignments, and I would come back the next day and I would read my poems, and the class would clap. And I would say to Mrs. Carlson, right, supporting of teachers and mentors, I would say, who are they clapping for? I said, they're clapping for you. I was a poet, I didn't even know it, right? And up until that point, it was a corner jump shot where I got my confidence. That was my only claim to confidence. And she helped me discover the G spot that I talk about, my gift for writing. I call it gold because we have treasure inside of us. And I'm going to transition with this sharing gold. And I devote this to Mrs. Carlson and all teachers, coaches, leaders that pour into young people and help them discover their G-spot. If ever there was a time for you to dig deep within, it is now, if only you would decide and begin. Mining your soul for your buried gold is why you are here, so dig deep and be bold. It is your purpose, your life's divine mission. It is your calling, so just be still and listen. And you will hear an oh so sweet sound telling you where your gold can be found. And you would be wise to not let another moment fly by, as the day will come when you'll surely die. Then the question for you will resoundingly be, did you dig deep for your gold for the world to see? Mining your soul for your buried gold is why you are here, so dig deep and be bold. And so that's a conversation starter. I'm going to ask everyone in the room for their prayers. I had my daughters first. I didn't grow up with my dad. Never woke up one day to say, good morning, Dad. And I was like real comfortable with this daddy's girl thing, right? And I was like, part of me was, you know what? I'm a little scared to raise sons. And God said, oh, you scared? Twin sons came. Here's two, right? And they're both 21 now and walking through their own wilderness, right? They know my story, making some of the same mistakes, the weed and just mental health. And I've had to learn like two things could be true at the same time. That yes, I could be a champion for Black male achievement. I could launch an I2 in America fellowship for young men that are the same age as my sons. And at the same time, they could be finding their way, right? Sometimes I'm like, I didn't get the memo? You didn't read the Black Male Achievement memo? This is how you're supposed to be. And we had a conversation around the table the other day, and Caleb talked about his anxiety. Cameron also around mental health, and coming out of COVID, how do we rally around and not point fingers, right? We want to do accountability, but affirmation at the same time. So I get hope when I see you young brothers and sisters, right? Because Donna will share with you when this movement, half the leaders are Black women. Half the leaders are Black women. And so I'm going to stop there and turn it over to my Bundini Brown, who has often been in my ear, calling me a champ and encouraging me in times when he didn't even know I needed encouraging. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Chris.
Thank you. Thanks, Shawn. So Ryan and I, well, first I'll uncover a tie that you all may not know about. So Shawn referred to him as a baller, himself as a baller. He actually played basketball at Wesleyan College. And one of our very own Chapel Hill community members who leads the UNC Center for Civil Rights, Ted Shaw, also played there, a little ahead of Shawn, or maybe a good bit ahead of Shawn. But so they know each other well, and in my head he would have been sitting here, but Ted is hard to get a hold of. So, but just thankful for that was part of the reason why we wanted to have Shawn here so he could spend some time with Ted. So Ryan and I decided to defer to you all because we have Lucha Tigre at 7:30 for whoever wants to get some empanadas and other fun food. So whatever questions y'all have, we want to give y'all plenty of time with Shawn. And the mics, we will run mics for y'all.
Well, folks,
First and foremost, thank you for speaking with us today. How did you identify storytelling as your best form of teaching?
That's a great question. I was a big comic book head growing up. I was an avid reader, so I read a lot of stories. But it wasn't until like my senior year of high school, I took a public speaking class, and this got like really great feedback. Right? I didn't see myself as a good storyteller, and I told this story of the summer of the Christmas of '75, and I had a fire in my home and in my apartment, and that my mom and I were standing on the fire escape, thinking that it was over, right? And the instructor said, "Wow, that's really a gripping story in the way you told it." So it was like getting feedback. I'm also I would encourage, if you write, you have a journal. Who journals? Raise it. It's cool. So raise it high. Like journaling and writing, it's kind of like fed my storytelling. And I was a real insecure, shy kid growing up. I realized that I actually like had a sense of humor into like my junior year of like college, right, and started coming into my own. And the other thing I will say is that I've had mentors that were like really great storytellers. Reverend Alfonso Wyatt in New York City. I worked a number of years at the Harlem Children's Zone in Jeff Canada, and watching him like tell, I was like, God, this is the fifth time I'm hearing this story, but it feels like the first time. And so that's gradually how I became a storyteller. And trust me, every time I have to get in front of a mic, scared to death. Scared to death, running to the bathroom, butterflies in my stomach, which reminds me, all right, you can't rely on your own strength, Shawn, right? God, you gotta get me through this speaking engagement.
Yeah, I guess, thank you so much for speaking with us today. I guess I have two questions. One, you mentioned God a lot, and I'm curious as to how religion played into the work that you have done and are still doing with Black Male Achievement, and then in your own life in general. And then also, there is a pastor by the name of Dr. Tony Evans, who also used to be the Dallas Cowboys football chaplain. I'm a Cowboys fan, but
my condolences.
I won't say too much. But he says in one of his books, in speaking about Christianity and some of the flaws that exist, the wrong people are reaching out sometimes and trying to speak about God, and they turn people away. And I guess in applying that to Black Male Achievement, how do you know when you might not be the right person to be reaching out? Or is that even such a thing?
Yeah, that's a powerful question. And you're asking that question at a time when we're seeing religion weaponized across the world, right? And personally, my faith journey, and my godmother took me to church, Methodist church, and I was too fidgety. And my mother even sent me to, I used to go to a Catholic camp for the summer called Dominican camp. But it wasn't until I was at my very depths of despair. And I think, there's a difference between religion and spirituality. But when I began my journey in recovery and began going to Narcotics Anonymous and began believing in a power greater than myself, that was the early journey. And it was not until years later that I turned my life over to Jesus Christ, right? And that you gotta believe in something. And I don't advocate for a particular a faith tradition. It's about, in my mind, believing like in the connection that we all have with each other. And I think you can exude spirit without bashing folks on the head with it. We used to have an annual gathering at the Muhammad Ali Center called Rumble Young Man Rumble. And just the ethos of the gathering, it was like a revival, but not a revival in the sense of proselytizing for any particular faith. It was about love, learning and leading, a sense of spirituality. We would have morning spiritual circles. And I just believe that we are trying to solve a social issue with the absence of a spirituality. And one of the things, one of the jobs that I have now is I work for a venture philanthropy firm that's called New Profit. and we have this framework called the MIC, Multiracial Intergenerational Cross-Sector Coalition Building. And when I joined a year ago, I was like, you can't have cross-sector and leave the faith community out. So I've been a champion with embracing the faith community. And you had asked a question about how do I know I'm not the right one? I'm trying to understand that question, but this is what I will say. It just takes me, I don't know if this answers it, but in my youth development work, I talked about coming back to be the executive director of the Dome project, right? And this is, shortly before I surrendered to my addiction, right? I discovered that there'll be some young people like, you just don't click, right? And I remember Marvin Frazier, who we used to run an alternative junior high school. And we had several sites, a few on the Upper West Side and 3 up in Harlem. And Marvin was always angry. Marvin would have fights. I would be called in, you got to talk to Marvin. And, there were days when Marvin didn't come to school. I got to admit that I was like, oh, God, Marvin's not here, right? And in my mind, I said, Marvin's destined, Marvin's going to jail. He's going to, Marvin's going to have like a short, tragic life, right? And then all of a sudden, one day, Marvin stopped showing up to school, right? And we hadn't hear anymore from Marvin. Several years later, living in 110th Street in Central Park West in New York, and we had a concierge. And I came into the building, had a package, and this man is smiling at me. And he was like, you don't remember me, do you, Mr. Dove? I saw him smiling, and I looked at his name tag, and I was like, oh, that's Marvin Frazier. And I said to him, what happened? And he said, my mom and I moved down south. I started playing football. My coach became my mentor, right? And now he's working in my building. And I was like so convicted in that moment, because if it was left up to me at that time, I had like deemed Marvin was going to be a failure, right? And so at that time, I wasn't the right one, right? And I think that so much of this work of leadership and youth development is so, thank you for the question, it's like spiritually guided, right? And we get attracted to folks that, I believe God knows that we can help. And I wasn't the one for Marvin, but his coach. And I said to myself, I will never, I was young, and I will never look at any young person and say, this is their future, right? And so you just reminded me of Marvin, that Marvin Frazier, and his coach was the right one for him, and I wasn't. It was like, what are the coincidences that he's gonna come back and be the concierge in my building, right? I was meant to so I talk about philanthropy and leadership, that we spend a lot of time looking out the window, but not so much looking in the mirror. And I encourage all leaders to spend that reflection time. And that's 3 things that you have to have, or I recommend. One is have mentors and using your mentors. 2, if you're in a management position, have an executive coach. And 3, have a therapist, right? There is no, Thursday, 4 p.m., I am in therapy. And therapy is not about, for me, fixing a broken Shawn. It's about finding new ways that I can live and deal with my emotions. And so I write about that in the book, and how to demystify just asking for help, right? I think one thing coming out of the pandemic and upside, there is an upside of the pandemic. I've seen more black men raise their hand and say, I need help, right? And are, getting therapeutic help. I don't know if I answered your question, but, thank you for prompting some things in me.
So let me do this just for time. Danita's gonna close us out, and then we have time, a little bit of time here, and then whoever wants to join us at Lucha Tigre, you'll have time to answer there. So if we're late, then they may not let us sit. So.
Okay, because I was like, I asked some questions.
Okay.
Okay.
I just hear.
Should I do it from here, Chris? You want me to stand up? You want me to?
Can you, we want to see your.
What time do we have to leave here?
We need to be over there in about 10 minutes.
Oh, 10 minutes, okay. All right, so you get to this. You coming to dinner?
Yeah, they can because they can.
I feel like Lauren Hill. I want to thank you so much, Chris, for asking me to speak a couple of minutes. And I want to thank you, Brother Shawn, for the words that you have laid out. I call Chris my godson. Mm-hmm. And when I was a student at the North Carolina A&T State, I was under the mentorship of Reverend and Sister Joyce too. In fact, Reverend Johnson married my husband and I a long time ago, and we have some people in common with my brother's keeper too. And I just want to thank you because I, of course, know about your program, and I think what's different in mentoring in 2023 than was maybe in the late 90s is that type of program focused on something being wrong with young black men that needed to be fixed. Mm-hmm. And in particular, a lot of times it was just the white person to hang out with or to be up under their tutelage so they could show you. And I really appreciate the fact that you deal with systems and how these systems and narratives have really put us behind in terms of understanding who we are. And I want to see all these beautiful young black men who have come tonight in support of this effort, and just thank you for coming. If we don't understand who we are as a community, we have given ourselves over, and you have it in you, and I see it, and I think that's one of my spiritual gifts, is that I can see the beauty and potential, especially in all of your faces. So I think that's something that Chris and I share. And again, Chris, thank you for really digging into narrative, because narrative is important. That's a lot of the work that I do. And, I really appreciate you bringing up Langston Hughes. I think it's so important for us to define who we are instead of having other people define who we are. And the movement is a continuum. It was there before you got here. It's going to be there after you leave. But together, we can work to provide a better space. And also, you mentioned Langston Hughes, and my favorite Langston Hughes poem to keep me going is "Things that make me crazy don't have no effect on me, but I'm gonna keep right on at it until it make you crazy too." So thank you so much, Chris, and for all of the organizers of this event. We need more like this in Chapel Hill. We need to lean on each other and be there for each other. So thank you so much, and that's what I would like to say.
Thank you.
If everyone could gather up, I want to get a picture.